webinar. Today, we are going to cover the key valuation topics that you cannot ignore in 2024. So we will talk about many topics in a glance, but we will focus on trends and then also have a quick look of how to apply all of these concepts in practice directly. So who is speaking today? I'm together with Steve, who will introduce himself in a minute. It's myself. I'm Max. I'm here at Valutico since now over 4 years and cover the valuation service department. Here we talk about doing valuation projects, doing all the internal and external supply with a deeper knowledge. So I'm very happy to be here and discuss the topics with you. A brief glance about Valutico, who we are. We are now worldwide operating. We have 650 clients worldwide in over 90 countries. Our team is now over 70 team members, which are distributed in 24 countries. Our main offices are in Europe, in Austria, in the UK, and in the US. As of the main office, also launching our Singapore office right now, but a lot of people here that work from all over the world. We work with some clients, and you probably recognize some of these logos here. A lot of mentionable clients trust our solution. We work with BDO, for example, with more, and some other clients you probably recognize here. Distributed all over the world, many of them in Europe and UK, etc. And with that, I'll pass it to you, Steve.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Not much to add to this slide, except to say that I did send the picture of George Clooney in for me, and I didn't put it on, so that's the sad bit there. But the main thing here is I just love valuation. You know, I'm just I just enjoy it, and I hope that comes through. Don't get bored with valuation very much. As a main, what I do in real life is options in Monte Carlo most of the time. But so that's enough about me. Back to you, Max.
Thank you, Steve. That was a very humble introduction. Actually, we are very glad to have you on that webinar. Steve is an absolute expert on valuation topics. So in case you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat all the time. Today is a very good opportunity to ask him since we have such an expert on the call. Let's talk a little bit about what we will cover today before we start directly off. So first of all, we will discuss the venture capital method, a few pros and cons / considerations when we value early stage companies. Then Steve will go into debt levels, debt target, and then following the basis of value, talking about fair value and investment value. I will then talk about market comparables. And last but not least, we will round it up with discussing assumptions, forecasting, and projections in the digital age. We will combine that, as mentioned, with the practical applications. So we will switch back and forth into a real-life case of evaluation that we will obviously very fast create together, just to have you understand better how valuation can look like in the 21st century. And last but not least, we will have a Q&A. Again, I really encourage everyone to put your questions into the chat. Regina has an eye on that. And at the end, Steve and myself will tackle your questions. Good. With that said, let's go directly into it and start it off with the venture capital method. I will keep the theory short so we can have a look at the practical approach directly, but there are still a few things we need to cover. So first of all, when we are talking about the VC method, we are always in the world of early stage companies, usually startups from the tech sector or other high growing sectors. And these companies bring some characteristic with it that you usually don't see when doing the classic valuation. So sometimes other methods don't really apply. You could, for example, have loss-making companies, negative EBITDA, negative EBIT, so multiple valuation sometimes does not really work. And a few key considerations when you actually do the VC method is, on the one hand, discount factor. So you probably want to adjust your discount factor. You want it to reflect the risk of a startup. And therefore, on the one hand, can also work with premium, but on the other hand, the venture capital method, as we can see in a second, derives their own metrics, how to reflect that. On the other hand, what is crucial and the fundament of a good valuation is financial forecast. So as long as you have a good projection that you can defend about net debt, sales, enterprise value projections, etc., you're usually good to go. Still, startup valuation is always a bit tricky. We could do our own webinar about that. Always very assumption driven, so the forecast should hold. In our venture capital method, we work with multiples. So we apply them in the venture capital method from the transactions and the peer group. So it's always very important to select the right peers from operational fields. We come to peer selection a bit later, but there are a few considerations that we will discuss. And last but not least, investors or evaluators should be aware of the time horizon and the money multiple. Well, with that said, let's have a brief look about the practical approach. So we are now in the Valutico platform. I will quickly create a private market valuation, give it a name. I could just call it webinar for the purpose. We can base it in the United Kingdom. Industry, let's use IT services, and then let's just select the right financial year. Last annual revenue, you can just use a sample figure, use the business plan, and create the valuation. And what the system does now is putting a lot of data together. We pull the data live from capital ICAEW, trading economics, etc., and can already see some results. While I'm skipping some parts now, I'm going directly to the valuation overview. Financial figures are coming from the peer benchmarking and based on the revenue we entered. So might be some things to adjust. But what I want to show you is now the venture capital method. See a lot of methods here. And if I decide to show the venture capital method, I can just do so. Save my changes. And now I've decided to display this method as well. It's, by the way, a very nice way to customize the whole overview here. Keep it all flexible. You see, it's a little bit lower. Business plan might be more for a mature company, but just to understand how the venture capital method works, it's more than good enough. I'm scrolling down through the appendix, and here we go. So what we are basically doing here, we have that for EV sales, EV EBITDA, EV EBIT, and the PE. It's basically a calculation where we go and calculate an equity exit value based on the sales figure or the underlying figure, depending on the method selected, the multiple, in that case, the sales multiple subtracted by the net debt, and then the whole thing gets discounted in the exit year. You obviously have the chance to select the exit year or the time horizon and also the money multiple, which then automatically gets calculated to the IRR. And with that, we kind of combine the usual approaches of the venture capital method with some market data, the multiples, and combine the best of two worlds. Good, back to the presentation. I'm handing over to you, Steve. This is your topic now, basis of fair valuation.
Okay. Thanks very much, Max. This is, for me, is absolutely crucial because it asks the question, why are we doing the valuation? And so many times I'm called in as a consultant where we're not sure why we're actually doing it. And fair value is, as I say, it's not the only game in town. And what I'm looking at here is actually that gray line is a continuum of value. And lots of people have different values. The two major types of value are investment value, which are everybody's value in use. And then you've got market value or fair value, which is a sort of a distillation of these. And what you can see, the third one is called a synergistic value, which is the value that number 6 could pay. Number 6, he can pay a lot more because he has some special synergies. Whereas if you look at numbers 2, 3, 4, and 5, they are probably what you would call market participants in fair value terms. So you can then derive a couple of things. First of all, between 5 and 6 would probably be the range of the negotiated price. And the fair value would probably be somewhere between 2, 3, 4, and 5. which would be, let's say we've got 6 different possible investors or bidders. And that's absolutely crucial. And then there may be this thing for forensic specialists, for example, if 2 and 4 are having a dispute, there may even be what's called an, or as I say, 1 and 4 should be 2 and 4 there, may have an equitable value. Now, all of those are going to give different values, and different values will be different assumptions as to what their forecasts might be, what their risk might be. You probably know that you can actually create value in synergies, not only by putting money onto cash flows, but of course also by reducing risk, by diversification, by different leverage profiles, for example. And so this is the first question I would always ask, and understanding the differences between the two. Knowing, of course, that book value is just a mishmash of historical cost and some, and some perhaps some fair value, and liquidation value is a sort of the worst case scenario here. So this is something which I think is important, because we should be asking this right at the beginning of the process. Who wants to know is the big question you want to ask yourself whenever you're doing a valuation. And believe me, for a lot of us smaller valuers, and I'm not part of the big 4 anymore, fair value is probably not that valid. We're probably being asked to value people's negotiating positions, for example, or looking at their value in use for IS 36 for impairment purposes, for example, rather than fair value. So that I put first, and then when we move to the next one, when we look at debt, then the basis of value is also a very important part, which is why we put this before the debt. Max, have you got anything to add to this before we move on?
Well, clear from my side. I give you the next slide.
Before you do that, it would also, this sort of thing would also link into the qualitative assessment as well on Valutico, which I find a very useful element when you're asking questions as to how the company is positioned. You might also look at how it's positioned to the market participants or the probable buyers. And then coming back to the venture capitalists, for example, the venture capital model, that's effectively probably more of a pricing model than a valuation model in many cases, because it's bringing the idea of what returns different investors might want, and they may be portfolio investors or value investors, growth investors rather than the value investors. So important picture this for me in valuation is one I use in virtually all my courses. Okay, let's move on to debt. Now, debt was one of these things that it took a while for me to actually understand it when I was doing valuation. It's probably one of the more difficult ones to understand. And I think we sometimes talk about, oh, wait a minute, is this the one we have here? Yes, I'm not sure if this is the actual slide. Have you got the next slide on here? Is this a slide we were going to use? That's the one, yes. Yeah, that's the one. When you're looking at debt, it comes in 3 or 4, is brought in 3 or 4 ways into the valuation models here in the income. First of all, is unlevering and relevering betas. Our good friends Modigliani and Miller, we use D over E to relever the benchmark betas. But of course, we use D over D plus E, which is the capital structure, to do value the WACC calculation. Now, that's how they're used, what you're actually going to use them for. But in practical application, one of the major things is to see, well, okay, what's the optimal capital structure? And most of the time, we don't actually do an exercise on it. In fact, in my career, I've probably only done 3 or 4 exercises on optimizing capital structure. And that's been where there's been no peers. What we tend to do is we tend to look at the peer group and say, well, okay, if the peer group is listed, and most of the time we're looking at listed companies, the fact that these guys are still in business and the directors haven't been fired yet means that they're probably the market is probably happy with it. And that's another thing with Valutico, is when you look at the metrics, looking at the debt structures of these companies that we're using as benchmarks. So we'll often benchmark rather than do an optimization of capital structure, which is, if you did it, you'd look at every single, you look at 10% up to 90% D over D plus E, and you would then work out what the lowest cost of capital would be in WACC. Now, we don't do that because we don't need to, because the market that does it for us. But it does bring in another very interesting question when you're looking at basis of value, because if you're looking at fair value, you would tend to use not the debt that the company has at the moment, because I think that's quite irrelevant a lot of the time. Are we interested in what the company has at the moment? Probably not, because one of the first things that any acquirer will do will be to re-lever up to a normal level of leverage. So this is one of the reasons why we don't tend to look at the existing level of leverage. You know, for example, an owner-managed business is going to have no leverage. Most of us entrepreneurs probably went into business so that we wouldn't be told what to do by idiots, and that's concluded by the banks. So a lot of owner-managed businesses will have no debt, but that's not the optimum level of debt. So normally we will rearrange the debt and make a target level of debt as to what a normal market participant would have. And the second big mistake that a lot of people make, and perhaps less so now, is that they just look at the balance sheet. They look at the market value of the debt. Well, that's not going to be too different from amortized cost on the balance sheet, but the market value of equity, well, that usually bears no relationship to the book value of equity. So it's definitely market values here. And going down is basically dependent on the basis of value. If you're looking at the investment value of a particular acquirer, you're looking probably at his target debt structure. Maybe a private equity house, for example, who has a very high debt structure, as opposed to perhaps an owner-managed business, who would say, well, we're going to have, one family business buys another, there might be no debt. So there's a difference there between the investment value of particular acquirers, who may have different views on debt, and fair value, which would be sort of a benchmarked cost of debt, and also the benchmarked capital structure, which again comes back to the Valutico platform. A nice touch is if you look at the metrics and the benchmarking, the debt and equity is given there, and it's very important. So those are the major things I'd like to talk about debt, and it does increase or decrease value, because if you reduce the cost of capital by putting in cheaper debt than equity, then of course you've increased value in that way. Max, I think it's over to you now on the next one.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Unless you want to illustrate that on the platform, but
yeah, I will cover that anyways as a part of when showing the market comparables, since this data is quite connected. So let's cover the quick discussion about market comparables and then go right back into the platform. So when we discuss, or when we try to select peers, there are obviously the classic ways. I assume all of you are working with bigger databases. I don't want to call out the names, but you probably know the big ones. And nowadays, it's getting actually easier and easier to select the right peers by not just using one database, but combining all of the databases or several one of them in one system. So selecting a peer or a transaction as well from several databases by just one search is actually something that speeds the time up a lot. So combining the databases is something you might want to consider nowadays. Obviously, such ideas also come with the efficiency usage of artificial intelligence. So when you, for example, have a tool that can help you to produce keywords or help you to dig into very deep niches when it comes to peer selection, then you probably save a lot of time. And when basically searching for peers, I want to discuss here two key considerations that should always be kept in mind. So first of all, in the digital age or nowadays, you also want to search for companies that are operating in the same area. I mean, that's always been the case, but in the digital transformation and sustainability initiative, this changes a little bit. Secondly, geographical versus digital marketplaces. So obviously, we know that markets can differ. They can have impacts on the multiple. A company based in Singapore might differ from a company based in the UK, even though the operations are very similar. It can be a little bit different when operating online. So if a company is based wherever, but operates kind of all over the world, it can be maybe comparable to other companies based in other locations. So this kind of digitalization kind of changes the game a little bit and opens the world a little bit in the world of valuation. Let's have a look at that in practice. I'm switching back to the platform. going directly into the peer search, the company already did suggestions. So based on our inputs that we are a company in UK, based in the industry of information technology, we got a little peer group built up together with all of the multiples and the medians that are actually applied. So when we now actually want to search for peers, we could obviously just add them up by typing it in. I think that's the way you know it from your familiar solutions, but the way that it really can speed things up is a filter function. So by filtering a peers selection by industry, by country, either by selecting a whole region or individual countries, let's actually do that. Let's use IT services. Let's use United Kingdom as a country. I don't put in a company name because we kind of want to keep it broad, but we can also use the full text search. So here we could say cloud or networks. And then the system searches directly into the descriptions of the companies, basically meaning if you have very specific terms, you can go into very detailed searches. It's a little bit of playing around, but when you found your right terms, your right keywords, you can find companies and peers really fast, even though they're really niche. And that is something a lot of our clients really appreciate because it speeds up the progress completely. And when you identify the fitting peer, just click on that. It gets added to the list automatically. And that's pretty quick progress. And then you can actually go for a deeper check if you want. So if you want to check the company again, you can just go on the profile, read basically everything about their operations. It's a very detailed description that basically covers everything you need to know. You can see financials. Whole thing is also directly linked to the website. You can find similar peers on that. And even a beta calculation. So peer group search, as it should be, is very transparent because at the end of the day, you need to defend that in front of your clients. This is definitely what you don't want to spend too much time on because it's a very repetitive work. This is why it's really nice that you can speed the search up and use tools like this. Good. Maybe going a little bit back and cover what Steve said. I really want to show that as well. Going back to the levels of debt, we're displaying that here, levels of value. Steve, do you want to lose a few words on that again? Maybe the thing about synergy premium, etc. You were covering that slightly.
Well, yes, the levels of value, of course, are our famous DLOMs and DLOCs and synergies. The way we would tend to deal with synergies would be to, I would like to do normally that through the cash flows as much as possible. But there are occasions where you could use a reduced cost of capital to also do some synergies. For example, if one company can diversify and another can't, then that's going to have a higher investment value. Of course, the DLOMs for smaller companies and the DLOCs for lack of control, this discount for lack of marketability here is obviously going to be helped really through the qualitative assessment. And for me, that's one of the strongest parts of the Valutico platform. Not necessarily for the answers it spits out, it's actually for the questions it asks. It asks really good questions. And then the discount for lack of control, this is it's actually difficult to measure that, but it's all about oppression and information that's available. But what I would like to show would be looking at the metrics from the benchmarks. If you can put that, that would be very useful there, Max, where if you go, yeah.
So I'm going into the business plan right now, where you have projected data. You also get asked to upload your own functions, so no need to put in anything manually. I'm keeping the peer forecast for now, but going to the benchmarking, where you can directly see the benchmarking coming from the peers directly for every metric that is applied to sales, EBITDA, EBIT, net income, CapEx, working capital parts, and a graphical overview. Steve, anything you want to share about that?
Well, if you look at there's another one which has the multiples on it with the peers, and then if you go to the right of that one, the peer selection there, that's it. Yeah, so if you go to the right of that, you'll see if you scroll to the right, you'll see the financing structure there, for example, which I think is very useful for determining what a target debt and equity multiple, debt and equity percentage might be. It's very useful, and also the credit spread, which is quite useful as well. What the cost of debt might be as well, if you're looking at a WACC situation. So I think that's one area that's very important. And if you then go to the benchmarking tab there, you've got things like something I really like is the not only the growth, but right on the right hand side, you can see the capex to sales. I think if I've got something in there, capex to sales here, which is one of my bugbears, is that sometimes that people don't put enough capital expenditure into the forecasts, especially at the terminal period. And this capex to sales can be quite an illuminating metric, if you like, for determining how intensive a company is in terms of how many fixed assets it needs, because that's going to hit your cash flow quite heavily. One other thing I would like to say about benchmarking data, it's often given to the most junior member of the team. And given the fact it's got such an impact on the valuation, I sometimes wonder, it's something I get involved with myself, I sometimes wonder actually it should be done by a more senior member of the team, certainly not the person who's new off the boat straight out of university, to be able to ask the questions and use the filters. And then also make the assessments by looking at the different information. I love this ellipse here to just if you go next to the name here where you can ask, look at information and do a review of each of the companies you've chosen. So that's one of the things it's a very influential number. So as a result, I would actually have someone certainly not in their first year. It's not the first thing you give them straight out of university if you're in a larger company. And the second thing is that when I'm looking at the valuation methodologies and models and approaches, you tend to use the approach and the model which makes best use of the best data that you can get. And the analogy I sometimes use is if you're planning dinner and you go around the local market to buy your data, you're going to choose the food which is fresh, which is nutritious, and which is available. And this is why the sort of the benchmark data here is it is fresh, it's nutritious, and thanks to the platform here, locally available. So that will also be a big input as to what actual model you eventually choose, because the only reason we use different models is that some models react better to different information that's available. And if information isn't available, such as with venture capital, you've got to be a little bit careful, because most of the time you're not going to have very good cash flows or discount factors. This is cash flows and discount factors very horrendously difficult with venture capital companies or startups. So that's why we use what's available, which is effectively a market pull. So that's my 2 cents worth on that, Max. I hope it's useful.
Thanks a lot, Steve. Very insightful as always. Maybe just one thing I want to show in that page again. You mentioned the benchmarking here. So in case you identify an outliers, you can do this obviously on a very quick view. Just look at this one, Smart Space software seems completely outlying. You can then obviously check, have a little research on why that is the case. But if you don't like it, you can just kick it out, and therefore get a very on spot peer group together very fast. Going back to the slides. Good, we're quite fast, Steve, today. So maybe we can spend a little bit more time here, because this is also one of the most crucial things when discussing evaluations. Good. So when it comes to forecasting and predicting future performance, it's usually all about assumptions. And when you try to defend your assumptions, you need to know the purpose of your evaluation. So sometimes it's really, or not sometimes, always, it's really crucial to understand why are you forecasting? Is it for a tax purpose? Is it for a venture capital case? Is it for an exit? Is it for whatever? It's really important to know how and why to do that. So there are a few things that are currently challenging that. It's at the moment, you all know it, the interest rates are quite dynamic at the moment. And putting that in a forecast, not over 1 or 2 years, but maybe over the next 5, 6 years, when you do your DCF and you know your income streams, and predicting interest rates can be quite difficult. But for some businesses, this is crucial. There are a valuation where the interest, especially for debt finance companies, are defining the big part of the value. Other things is a tax shift. Changes in tax might also affect the value of your business in the sense of profitability, especially if you go for methods such as the flow to equity approach that are net income driven. So taking the value after your taxation. UK, for example, is doing exactly that in March. So right now there is a tax change, and a lot of forecasts might not have predicted that a few years ago, or that it was announced. Time to adapt it. But just as an example given, in some countries, the tax changes or interest rate changes also are more impacting than in Western Europe, but definitely something you want to be aware of. The next point, let's discuss about forecasting essentials. So first of all, we talk about economic adaptability. Incorporate flexible forecasting models to quickly adjust to interest rate fluctuations and economy policies. We kind of discussed that. I will show that to you in a minute on the platform directly. It's really important to know where that comes into place and how to cover that. Second of all, tax planning precisions. Again, if you know that the tax rate will change or that there are tax payments that particularly affect the structure of your company, you need to be aware of that and definitely put it into your forecasts. Last but not least, discuss strategic considerations. First of all, we have the enhanced cash flow management. So you have to prioritize robust cash flow strategies to maintain operational resilience amidst higher tax liabilities. In simple terms, you have to figure out where the cash flow comes in to know how to tax it and to plan everything accordingly. Secondly, profit performance awareness. You have to recognize that maintaining level profits in 2024 demands innovative approaches sometimes to offset increase the financial obligations. That is a particular point for SMEs that are underlying these risks that we just discussed even more. For some of these companies, this could be a real neck breaker, if you want to call it like that, and discuss things definitely with a professional. Steve, anything you want to add on that slide on the forecasting and projections? Is a very
I'd firstly like to draw the distinction between forecasting and projecting. And projecting is like extrapolation. Is that if you start in year one, you're forecasting. But as you go through the explicit forecast period, you bring in more and more projections based on that original forecast. And by the time you get to steady state, which is the terminal period, it's all projection. I mean, the only variable is basically a growth rate. Now, that means that the time you spend, you really should spend most of it on the first year, because any errors or anomalies that you make in the first year are going to be pushed forward throughout the whole term period. And the next important year, of course, is the terminal year, which is often providing up to 70% of the value. So you better get that right. And the most important part of that is looking at your investing cash flows, which is your capex, your working capital, and your depreciation. Of getting that right. So it's very important indeed. Now, Max has talked about the uncertainties that arise. Now, I'd like to make a call out for scenario analysis. Now, it's something which is not yet incorporated into the Valutico platform, but by opening up two models, if you like, you can put in different scenarios and show benchmark ranges, for example, to help. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Max, but I find that in today's uncertainty, you know, whether it's who's going to get in during the next election, which we know, but what are they going to do? Who's going to get in America, for example? What's going to happen in the geopolitical situation? There are so many things that are uncertain that one forecast is, or one set of forecasts and projections is often not going to be enough. And so I'm a great fan of scenario analysis in terms of covering different ranges of things that could happen. So those are
I
the
have
two.
good news at that point. We actually have that in the platform. I will show it in a minute, but you
Oh,
can
great.
switch between several scenarios, obviously not political, but financial scenarios, and incorporate all of these assumptions in one project.
Great. Well, that's something because that's something which I will look forward to seeing. Are you able to show that, or is that something which is you prepared to show
Absolutely.
that? All right, let's go for that. Yeah, good. Good.
To the business plan, so where all of the financial data is crunched, you can see that here. And if I click on the scenario manager, I'm now at the peer case. So this is all based on the benchmarking, based on the peer multiples. If I click on the scenario manager, I can basically just duplicate one scenario and call it, for example, optimistic case, and then just work in that duplicate. And I have now two options. Either I upload a new set of data. We provide you with an Excel template for that, so you can just link it to your own financials, or you just override it. You can override, for example, the value directly or the growth rate for the sales. If you say you want to have a more optimistic case, let's just increase all of these values a little bit. And this is basically how the thing works. And you can do that either for a real scenario planning or for just playing around with your financials without messing up the original case. So if I say, okay, I want to see the original case again, I can just switch back. Nothing was touched here. It gives you the opportunity to be a little bit more flexible with your scenarios.
That's brilliant, Max. It shows that I'm not totally current with your platform because I tend to use it for more the benchmarking and qualitative assessment. But that for me is a very powerful addition to the platform. And thanks for showing us. I think Max might have frozen. Is that Georgina? Do we think Max is frozen in Singapore?
Yes, I think he may have frozen for the moment. I think he'll come back very shortly. Oh, I think he's coming back now.
Freezing in
Max,
Singapore.
Sorry, I was frozen for a second, I guess. All right. Steve, you were just talking about the qualitative assessment.
Yes.
Let me also say that it's a very nice tool. Here you can put in data that is, yeah, I always say data that is hard to quantify. So more subjective measures such as company size compared to the rest, but also things such as management quality, reliance on key customers, customer lock-in, product quality. Is it a good product or a bad product? This is obviously very subjective. The weightings are given on industry standards, but you can also override them. At the end of the day, this is a tool that helps you to check plausibility for some risks that are not necessarily reflected in the financials. Usually, these are hard to measure, so we provide you with a tool that gives you an adjustment on cost of equity and on the discount and on the trading multiples. So they discount the trading multiples and top up the cost of equity, and you have a nice metric to defend all of these.
No, I love this, mainly for the questions that are asked. But I have a question for you, Max. If you go back to innovation, if you click up to innovation on the qualitative assessment, it asks how innovative is the company. And if you're doing for example, a venture capital, the startup, they're all going to be innovative. And I often get asked this: do you put very innovative, or is it very innovative compared to the benchmarks?
Yep. it's always obviously compared to the market.
Compared to the
if
market.
you value a tech company, let's say a fintech in the field of valuation as we are, then you obviously compare it to other fintechs in that field and not a construction company. Hope that makes sense. Yeah, always to the peers and the market.
Well, if it's to the market, it'd be very innovative. But if it's to the peers, they might not be as innovative as their peers, and that's the sort of question I sometimes get asked.
It's a little bit tricky with startup valuations to find exactly the same peers. You're completely right with that. But this is where we then take the discount on trading multiples into account to make these peers, who are sometimes really incumbent players, a little bit more comparable to smaller players such as an SME or even a VC case.
Excellent.
Yeah, that's kind of the idea. And then this is all reflected in the valuation at the end. So let's do an obvious one. I say we are a very big company. The cost of equity premium shrinks. So does the discount on the trading multiples. If you go on the final valuation overview, the whole thing is calculated directly, and the adjustments we just made are calculated live.
So this is going into the alpha. One of the things I do with the qualitative assessment, Max, is that I do it with my client on screen. And I always tease them when it comes to management quality. I always sort of pull it down to show it's rubbish, see whether they defend themselves. But a lot of the time, they sometimes agree with you. But it's a very good tool also for working with your clients actually on the screen. It's because it asks the right questions, and I always come back to this. The good consultant's the one that asks the good questions rather than the one that's got all the answers. So back to you, Max.
No, absolutely. I'm agreeing. We also do that on screen. Usually the clients of ours are the experts, so they know all the details. But what I wanted to show you all is that we see here a discount rate, and the cost of equity premium, for example, got directly calculated to 3.3% that we just saw, leading to our discount rates, either the cost of equity or the WACC, depending on the method selected. So this is all some things that happen very fast and very direct. Good. Is there anything content-wise you want to add, or should we?
You're breaking up a bit here, Max, but I think we should move on to questions. I think would be a good idea.
Sounds good. Then moving on to the questions. In the meanwhile, if anyone has further questions on the content or about Valutico, you can contact our VP of Sales for the European market, Greg Brown. You can just scan the QR code or text him an email directly, take a screenshot of that and reach out. He's always happy to connect with you. And yeah, with that said, let's move on to the questions. Georgina, did we get questions? I cannot see them.
No questions have come through. So if anyone has any questions, please ask, as these guys would love to answer them for you. It's a really good opportunity.
This is the interesting bit, This is the bit that I enjoy most. Can't believe we've explained things so well that nobody has any questions.
That's why we invited you, Steve.
I always get questions, but
if you don't have any questions now and may think of them later, feel free to reach out to us, and we can always make sure that we can answer any questions you have for you as well. So.
Perhaps just a question about your country spread in Valutico. You're mentioning 90 countries at the moment, Max.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are your main concentration areas?
Yeah, obviously the countries where finance happens, if you want to call it like that. A lot of our clients are in Western Europe and Eastern Europe as well. US is also a big thing. Within Europe, we have a lot of clients in the DACH region, Germany, Switzerland, Austria. UK is also one of our biggest pools of clients. we're developing really well in the APAC region. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we're setting up our entity in Singapore, having a lot of clients there already, also a team covering the whole region. And yeah, this is obviously one of the most exciting markets at the moment because a lot of things are happening there as well. But yeah, to answer the question in a glance, for now, I would say Western Europe is a very good bet to see where the most of our clients come. You see it here, 40% based here in Europe.
Now,
Actually, without the UK.
Looking at your client list.
30%.
Oh, sorry. Looking at your client list, I see that there's none of the big four are not there, and some of the larger companies are not there. And that's, I can understand that because they've all got their S&P platforms and they've also all got their own models. But when they're reviewing work that's been done through Valutico, are there any specific pushback questions or feedback that they give? Which in terms, I mean, do they accept? Do they sort of look at a Valutico output, and do they largely accept it, or do they come back and they ask lots of different questions about it? Is there any pushback?
Actually, I think we are working with Big Four already. I don't want to call out the names if they're not on deck. Maybe this is due to an NDA. But you know, like integrating a platform as Valutico is always tricky for these bigger organizations because they usually want to roll out over several offices and have their own internal governance. So, you know, the compliance things are sometimes the issue that, yeah, things are difficult. But the clients we have, you see, we have BDO here. I'm pretty sure we have one of the big fours. Also PKF more, some bigger houses here.
Yeah,
they work with Valutico and are pretty happy to do so. So it's probably more of an individual preference.
Yes, it's I mean, to put it into context, I mean, the larger firms will have their own models and platforms, which sometimes they have them because then they're a little skeptical about stuff which is not invented on the premises, so to speak. But you know, it's sometimes there's pushback. I've not had any pushback, even for the qualitative assessment. I don't get much pushback from when I'm being reviewed by Big Four, for example. They're quite happy to accept that. They might have 1 or 2% difference or something like that, but they're usually quite happy because we've been through the process, and that's what I like. Is it's quite sort of transparent is the process. So it was a bit of a naughty question, that one, to see where.
No,
it looks like a few questions have come in.
Oh, great.
There we go. Max, can you see them?
Oh. Yes, I can see them. Maybe let's start here. Does the Valutico platform have transaction multiples? Very good questions. Very good question. And I'm more than happy to answer that with a clear yes. You should be able to see that now. This is our transaction overview. We have here several databases. We work with S&P, the usual Capital IQ database. We have Forehost, especially for the UK. It's for very niche and smaller SME transactions. And we also integrated EMIT recently for an emerging markets transaction. We have here more than 1 million transactions, and the system works very similar as you've seen it on the peer screen. So you can also search for keywords here and filter by regions, industries, even the databases, the happening when the transaction was made, bidder, target companies, everything a transaction search would actually need. You can filter them out, look into all of the details. So yeah, that's a clear yes, we have the transaction multiples as well. Next question.
Tell us a little bit about Bohurst. It's for those of you who don't know what Bohurst is, it's very much transaction based, and they often look at transactions that haven't taken place yet as well. They're very, very wide into the market. Go on, Max. Yep.
Yes, reading out the next question. Does the model calculate specific company risk, or is that still on the valuation expert to try and calculate when calculating valuation? The platform does calculate the WACC. So I'm going to the discount to the cost of capital right now. You see this overview here. You see the tree. The platform does calculate the discount rates, but everything you see here is linked to a direct source. So I'm clicking now on changing parameters. So you can see an overview of all the parameters used here, or at least most of them. And if you're not happy with them, you can override it. If you have your own tax model or want to apply a different DC ratio, you can just override that. But the platform provides you with a good source of data. You can always see the source here on the little I button. You can also click on it directly to get more information. Some of these come from external data sources, Capital ICAEW, Trading Economics, or the peer group. That differs a little bit, but we give you the freedom to adapt the cost of capital on all necessary points. So it's all not a black box. We provide you with the thing, but at the end of the day, you're the decision maker. What are you using and what not? I hope that answers the question. Let's tackle the next one. In reference to venture capital valuation methods, the forecast being used and the IRR applied yields lower value than last funding round. What do you benchmark against? Last funding round or forecast method? Clearly, the investors in last funding round are expecting higher sales growth than being used in formulaic venture capital method. Steve, do you want to take that one?
Yes, I think this actually goes to the heart of some of the problems of the VC method, or not the VC method with startups, is that you've often got different types of investor. And that a lot of the growth shares, the type of investor is what you might call spray and pray, which is basically you just throw a lot of investments and you're on a portfolio basis. I sometimes call this FOMO investing, fear of missing out. And yes, you may very well get different yields depending on who the players are, who are the people, the characters who are actually investing in this. Because there you get, I think, a difference often between price and value. Someone actually investing in the last round there, again, things have moved. Depends if you're looking at the recent investment technique, which is the last funding round. Things move very fast. So if the last funding round was 3 months ago, that's a long time in a startup company. So yes, you may very well get different viewpoints. And when you're using the venture capital model, that's often giving you something which is as current as possible. And it's I do think the venture capital model is more of a pricing mechanism than a value mechanism, because you're really only going to get the value if you look at cash flows and risk. So yes, it highlights the difference between growth investors, who are basically throwing stuff at the wall and hoping some of it sticks on a portfolio basis, and value investors who are looking at individual companies saying, well, show us the cash and show us the risk.
Yeah, thanks for that. More of an organizational one, I will take that quickly as well. When will the recording be made available? Should be happen in the next couple of days. Correct me if I'm wrong, Georgina, but I think that's how we usually do it.
Yeah, it takes a while for the recording to generate, and then within a few hours, and then within, like you say, should be by the end of the week, early next week, that you'll hear from us with a recording. So then you'll be able to reflect on it. Thank you.
Good stuff.
I can answer Alex's question there if you want, Max. Alex, thank you very much for your question here. And this is probably the toughest part of valuation, is working with unlisted businesses and SMEs. And there are limits to the functionality because they're different animals. They're also different markets. The businesses may very well be differently run. And it's the old thing. You want to get something as close as possible, and then you're still going to have to come to judgment at the end of the day when you're looking at unquoted companies. There are, I suppose, databases which look at unlisted companies, but watch out, because if there is a transaction, for example, with an unlisted company, between an unlisted company and someone else buys it, watch out, because the multiple could be overstated, because the cash flows might be the EBITDA might be understated. A small SME, they're not exactly wanting to push their EBITDAs up. The only person they're going to impress is the tax man, and they're probably not the top of their Christmas card list. So you often find that the EBITDA, the multiples actually can be overstated because the denominator, which is the EBITDA, is actually understated. And by the same token, you sometimes find there's some funny things in the price there as well, because we'll all try to get the next 5 years salary of the seller into the purchase price, because then you're going to pay capital gains tax on it rather than national insurance and income tax. So it is a difficult one. It is probably one of the toughest things in valuation is actually looking at SMEs, and you can only start with the materials you've got. And then a lot of it's asking the question, well, okay, let's look at the cash flows if you can to make the difference. And by cash flows, I mean, if you're doing an EBITDA multiple, you might make changes to that EBITDA figure that you have, the latest one or the projected one, to make it something, well, we talk about normalizing. It's not a nice word, but let's say amending it so that it's something which is good going forward and which could be more directly comparable to the multiples derived from the listed companies. But not an easy one. There's no silver bullet for that one, Alex.
Yeah, very good answer. Thanks a lot. 2 more questions that we have here. One is, does the platform have graphs that plot, for example, multiple versus growth? Excellent question. And again, I'm more than happy to say yes, we have that. Let me quickly go into the benchmarking. And what you can see here are exactly these graphs. So you always see here the growth, the peers versus the actual sales. This also applies for EBITDA, EBIT, and net income. So you can see these very nice graphs and how things differentiate here. We can also export the whole thing as several Word or PowerPoint reports, also in multiple languages. We now support English, German, Spanish, French, Italian, and Portuguese, and Polish and Dutch. So you can put the whole valuation project in a nice valuation report where you even have more graphs that you can either copy in your own template or work directly with ours. Good, and then we have one more, and then I think it's time to wrap it up anyways, looking at the time. Are you able to see how the inputs were calculated in the model and where they come from? For example, on the calculation of the WACC, is it defined where risk-free rate is coming from? Or I think we tackled that a little bit, but since this is mentioned again, I'm showing it rapidly again in a little bit more detail. So again, I'm going to the overview of the discount rate. And you see here multiple types of data. And when I click again on changing parameters, scrolling to the discount rate and check the risk-free rate, for example, and I want to know where the risk-free rate is coming from, then I know, because I'm knowing it, this is usually based on the country. We pick that based on the country. But if you want to learn more, if you want to learn about the sources or want your clients making understand that, you can just click on the item directly. Clicking on risk-free rate, a new window opens up and brings me to our resources module. Takes a little bit of time because there's a lot of data processed in the background. But what you can see here, we are now already in the UK. We are on the valuation date, which is today, but could also be a different one if you do a historic valuation. We see the historical risk-free rate, and the platform picks the risk-free rate per the valuation date. So if you choose another date in the past, obviously that risk-free rate would be applied. You can see a link to the source directly, description, some reasoning, and that also works for corporate tax rate, market risk premium, and the country rating. So this is basically a very strong tool that gives you additional insights of where the data is coming from. Again, for us, it's very important that Valutico is not a black box. It should simplify your life, but you should still be able to control what is happening here, and much more important, to defend every single number that is displayed. So you will find the source and the reasoning for everything you see here. And we believe this is one of the crucial things that our mission kind of includes. Good, with that said, I think we went through all of the questions. Georgina, Steve, anything you want to add? Otherwise, I would say a big thank you to the round. Very good questions. I'm very happy that there was a lot of
for the questions.
engagement at the very end.
Yep, I think that looks great. It doesn't look like any more questions are coming in. So I'd just like to thank everyone so much for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much, Steve and Max, for being so wonderful in your explanations, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
A lot, everyone. Have a good day.
Good day to you.
Thanks very much. Goodbye, everyone.